Pleasured and pleased to have Cory Edmund. I love that. Endrulat. And I want to tell you a little bit about him because Cory's been doing some really awesome work in the world and doing a lot of speaking and letting other people have the mic. And I thought it'd be a cool opportunity to see and be able to discover a little bit more about who you are and what inspires you to do all of this really amazing work. So before we get into dialogue, I just want to read a little bit about you, which more people can find you on Amazon as well, besides your websites, because you have a couple of books on there as well. So Cory Edmund Endrulat is a fellow human being and a messenger of nature. He is an energetic and passionate researcher, writer, video content creator, and he's also a certified nutritional health coach. Cory's from Pennsylvania, which is the birthplace of American independence. It's perfect, right? In a way. All right. So Cory has done multiple detailed presentations and has written extensive material on a number of different subjects related to health and freedom. And just hearing those two words together, I'm so excited to really introduce widely how closely those two things are actually linked. Health and freedom. So there's more about Cory on his website, which I'll leave below. And he also has some really great books. Recently, Slavery Gone for Good, his main work, which is created with the intention that one day you too can feel free, which I think is amazing. So, Cory, what has inspired you to link the fields of health and freedom?
So health and freedom to me are one and the same thing. And maybe that's a stretch, but when I look at an individual, and I know your approach is individualized when it comes to healthcare, or at least you look at what is somebody's concerns. You say it's the subjective experiencer.
Mhm.
And so if I'm looking at the individual, they have a unique expression of their own. They're a unique person of their own. That self-ownership, that self-sovereignty is what makes them free. So expressing that and finding that for themselves is freedom just as much as it is health,
Mhm.
because they find out what works for them and they find out what is great, what really is going to heal them and bring them into their future to follow their destiny and follow what they know they should do. So it's more so finding that internal truth within them. And most people want to be free. Put an ant in a jar, it's like that wants to escape. So it's something that everybody and every being sort of desires. And bringing
Mhm.
that to the surface is health, because
Mhm.
it's like, wow, I can live my life without restraint, without something holding me and binding me in place where I can no longer live my life.
That's so good. I just saw yesterday somebody had written down a healthy person obviously wants many things. An unhealthy person only wants one thing, right? And I think that we sometimes, as you said, we conflate this idea of what health looks like externally, and we don't realize that this seed, this desire within our mind to maybe get out of the cage somehow, and we identify this cage as different things outside of us, like, oh, it's my work, it's my relationship, I'm restricted, I'm enslaved. Like, this slavery is also as much mental and eternal, like internal, as it is actually external. So I absolutely I love your definition and how you put this together. You often talk about, and it says here in your bio, the correlation between health and nature. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, well, that's core, very much essential. And also, I want to say thank you for introducing me. And since we're talking a little bit about me, my middle name Edmund is my grandfather's name. Not a lot of people know that.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you like that. I like it too. Have
Mm-hmm.
to. And so health and nature, and we just talked about health and freedom. Well, if we think about nature, what nature provides us is freedom. And when we look at natural medicine and we see all the uses it has, we often see it has a great correlation to health, right? And we see natural medicine helps give people a sense of freedom, freedom from using one pill or one specific thing that man has made. And we feel a sense of, wow, okay, this is like a sort of independence when people find out, like, wow, this plant is helping me and I can grow it myself, for
Mm-hmm.
instance.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a connection you can make between, nature and freedom as well. But nature and health, would be essential because health simply means whole. And nature, if I'm looking at nature as being the whole of this life, being all that consists of everything, the all of all,
Mm-hmm.
then it would have to be the health of everything. It would have
Mm-hmm.
to be the most holistic health, considering the fact it is everything, right? And then if I were to look at the nature of the individual, I'd be looking at their individual health, because
Mm-hmm.
that is what compromises who they are. Their whole. So this organ, that organ working together, and this whole body with a certain structure of its own that we call its nature. Well, similarly, we can call it its health. It should be able to function. Otherwise, it's no longer a body. It's no longer of its nature. It's no longer healthy because
Mm-hmm.
it's dead, or it's not working, it's not it's
Mm-hmm.
not existing. So we use these words actually interchangeably, and there's other words as well that could be used. I found out there's actually hundreds of words that can represent the same thing in the English dictionary, and you'll find this over and over again. you
Can you
know
give us some examples?
sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the word right, the word natural, the word truthful, the word reality, the word honesty, all of these in particular tie in as well as health.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this could sound interesting at first to some people, but when people use them in conversation, if you use these words interchangeably, you'll find out they actually apply quite well. So it's like what honestly works for me, like what healthily works for me, what truthfully works for me, what
Mm-hmm.
really works for me. It's like what really is your problem? Well, what naturally, like what truthfully is your problem? And you can just interchangeably use these words, and people can't really escape these words. So even
Mm-hmm.
if they think, oh, there isn't a truthful solution, oh, there really isn't a solution, oh, there really isn't a solution, really? So you're saying there naturally isn't a solution? There's
Mm-hmm.
got to be a solution, because there's a reason why something happened to you in the first place. There's always a reason for everything. So it's just a matter of knowledge as to knowing why that happened. So
Mm-hmm.
then you can find out how to go about and changing it, or if how to go about and preventing it, etc. So these words have to be interchangeable, because I think the language is sort of built as such.
Yeah, everything you said resonates so much with me and what I'm currently feeling and undergoing, which is the realization, like you said, of the really obvious yet obfuscated fact that this is all actually connected and that we have spent so much time hyper focusing on parts of ourselves. So then we hyper focus, we become very highly attuned or even an expert in one particular field, but it's kind of like looking down a microscope too long. You really start to lose what is going on around that small lens that you're looking through. But then you can become have like you can become such an expert by dialing in so deeply into that one subject or that one desire that you have, that you do have really clear vision there. But the paradox then is that you have lost an opportunity to see all of the interconnectedness and all of this stuff in what I have discovered to me as being like navigating what I would call the field, which is also so interesting because when I think of a field, I also think of nature and
Right.
and and a beautiful field full of wildflowers might look chaotic to something that's very prim and landscape as so far as like a garden. They're both beautiful, but essentially they have different meanings perceivably associated with them and people have different preference. But point being is that what you're saying really taps into this part of my brain where I'm realizing we don't have anything unless we realize the interconnectedness of our own health within our own system and how that reflects into the worlds of all of the other systems in society, right? So yes, is there evil in the world? Absolutely. But we have to really fully take into account the ways in which our toxic system or let's say aspects of our system that are integrated play into complying with particular systems of government or whatever that contribute to further slavery,
Hmm. Yeah, and
right?
and that's a huge point what you just made. Like when you talked about evil and slavery, and I talk about these topics too. I'm having to bring in nature, having to bring in these more expanded ideas are necessary. As you said, yeah, we can tend to focus on the little things. That's exactly what evil does, however.
Mm-hmm.
Evil
Mm-hmm.
contracts, fear contracts. When we're in fear, we can't think outside the box. We can't think. We're always stuck and we're
Yeah.
always independent. Now, again, going back to the idea of a drug, I need this drug, I need more, and you're never really satiated or happy.
Yeah.
So that is a matter of freedom as much as it is health. But when it comes to nature, nature I see being the whole of the all of all would have to be the expanding ever infinite. Okay, I usually
Mm-hmm.
use just the symbol of infinity, not
Mm-hmm.
just for time being
Mm-hmm.
timeless, but
Mm-hmm.
also infinite as expanded. So evil is something that contracts and something that is very limited. So yes, it's like looking at one little thing, and that's because that's all evil can do. It can't create anything new. It could only take what already exists and pervert it or twist it into its own ideology, its own box per se, right? Like you can look
Yeah.
at nature as a circle, an ever expanding circle, and here is man placing boxes upon that circle, saying this is what nature is, and you're like, no. If we have a great imagination and we bring back that inner child, we realize it's way more expansive than that, and there's a
Right.
lot more we can see, and there's a lot more we can learn from. But that is a matter of getting rid of what is evil, that box, and expanding out of that box into what you know to then be good, because
Right.
knowing evil is essentially knowing what is good. Knowing good is knowing what is evil. It's like these are two contrasting things. So they teach us of one another, and
Mm-hmm.
essentially it's like looking at the bigger picture minus the smaller picture that wants you to think small. It's like, no, I'm not going to think small. I'm going to constantly expand. I'm going to find what works for each individual in the case of healthcare. Like, I'm not going to say this drug is what's going to work or this medicine is the answer for everybody. I'm going to think a little bit more about it because there's so many different types of people and so many different types of conditions. We have to almost have a holistic worldview that encapsulates everything that's going on.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. What came up for me when you were saying that is to kind of go a little deeper into evil. Because again, I think that there is a conceptualization of what evil is, and the majority of people would say, well, I'm not evil. Because again, it's hard to see within the self because we don't really understand the behaviors and we're not looking fully holistically at it. So it reminded me of, if you're an expert, right? If you're going into that constricted state where you're just looking down the microscope and you're trying to cultivate an expertise about something, let's just say even a scientist, trying to solve something or do something, and he's really dialing in, there's a point, to me it feels like there's a point in which that's useful and necessary, but then there has to be like a retraction back to look at the whole. And it's like that dance of, Scott Gordon says, reach and withdraw. Because if you keep going in, it reminds me at some point it becomes about you and your success and keep getting better. And like your own personal worldview becomes all about you, right? Me being more perfect. And you can just see how in that obsession of becoming, oh, I got to redo it, make it better, and keep going and keep pushing and keep grinding, there's no relationship to her nature, everything else, because you've spent too much time in the hole, so to speak, in the black hole, and you haven't pulled back. So like, I think most people wouldn't understand that that's a contributing factor towards evil within the world, is you have to leave room for other people in the environment to allow their alchemical gold to shine, and for you to have more meaning by not being the ego all the time, not being the negative aspect of I'm the best at everything. So that I love that kind of going in, but then always make sure that you're pulling back, like the infinity. That it's
Mhm.
like all of this
Right.
symbology at some point just makes complete sense.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
right there. It's abolitionism versus integration. You
great.
can't
Can
have
can
one
you
without the
explain
other.
that? Yeah, can you explain that for people, audience
Sure.
members who might not know?
Right. I use abolitionism in several ways. One as an action and one as a movement or as a philosophy, basically, when people look at the term abolitionism, it simply means to abolish, to get rid of something.
Right.
So if you're getting rid of something, you have to question, well, what is being added in? And usually when it comes to health, it's like, well, I'm adding in a certain food to sort of crowd out something bad. In integrative nutrition, we say it's adding in the crowd out. So,
Right.
you can add in a certain food rather than taking out a certain food because naturally that food that is not supposed to be there will just go out on its own. But one way or another, you're taking away what doesn't exist or what's not supposed to persist and bringing in what's supposed to exist or what's supposed to persist. So that is a matter of integration, bringing together what needs to be brought together and then taking out what needs to be taken out. So abolitionism is taking out that of which does not belong.
Mm-hmm.
Integrating is bringing in that which does belong. That's a matter of knowledge, that process of transfer, that process of choice, of making sure, like, this is the path I want to be on. This is the direction that I want to take in my life. And you don't know that direction unless you've seen other directions and other paths. It's like, I don't want to go down this path of being an addict. I don't want to go down this path of being this or doing that. It's because you see where it ends up or you see the results, and it's not one of perhaps self-control. It's not one of freedom. Right.
Mm-hmm.
If you're addicted or lacking that self-control and independence of those different things that we talked about. So it's just a matter of freedom as well. Once you
Mm-hmm.
escape that box, any box, doesn't matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So, if it's
Mm-hmm.
anything that's holding you back, it's
Mm-hmm.
probably something affecting your health, probably something affecting your freedom,
Mm-hmm.
probably something that's affecting your nature. Yes, we
Mm-hmm.
are expanded. David Icke will say, or expand consciousness, awareness. And he always says this often. And people tend
Mm-hmm.
to discredit him for different things that he talks about. But
Mm-hmm.
that's his main message. It's like
Mm-hmm.
love everybody, expand your consciousness. And I
Mm-hmm.
think people can look toward that intent as well. You're right. People can look at the focus, but then once they have to still at some point in time come back to realities to realize like other people have not had that focus. And just because you had that focus does not make you the expert in that focus. You know,
Right.
Other people may have had that focus and had to go away from it as well. Because there needs to be a realization like we get trapped in these rabbit holes, we get trapped into talking about conspiracy subjects or this evil thing or that thing because of the world that we live in and because we feel
Mm-hmm.
like we have to. And truth is, we don't have to, but we feel like we must because there is problems occurring. We feel like, okay, well, now I need to delve really deep into this so I understand it really well. When it could be as simple as the Tao Te Ching says, where we just honestly sit down with ourselves, with the reality that we have and just embrace it, and the answers will come on its own.
It's beautiful. Thanks, Cory. This reminds me of this, what we're talking about. It reminds me of the consumption and the problem we have with overconsumption. And we can overconsume knowledge too, or that
Yes.
experiment side of things without being back into the experience. And I was just watching a video yesterday. I'll send it to you. I think it was called The Experiment of Mary's Room. I think this came out like in the 80s. And what they did was they had this experiment where there was Mary's Room, it was called, where this high level neuroscientist, they had her for a period of time. I don't know what. I honestly don't even know if it was a real experiment or was more like a thought experiment, but this is a popular thing where they had her in a black and white room. Everything she saw was black and white. And she was an absolute expert on color, vision, and vision. And all of the neurochemistry that goes into in the biology of vision, right? And seeing color. But she had never seen a red apple. So then at one point, they introduced a red apple and how just really proving that there's a knowledge trap sometimes too when you don't have the experience. So for me, we talk about sometimes the law of gender, masculine and feminine. And like you guys were saying when we did our interview on there's the experimenter and the experience itself, or the scientist and the reality. It's like there always has to be this. I think first and foremost is the awareness that this is even going on, like the awareness that if we use this lens as a form of self-development, right, to kind of see, then you can monitor yourself a little bit better to
Mhm.
maybe make more conscious choices upstream. So it was just so interesting, and what
Yeah.
you're saying is to kind of understand this duality and then get radically honest with your own self-work. Stop bullshitting yourself. And for me, and I'm sure with you as well, is I can only do my external work in the world because I'm fully committed to doing it constantly on myself. And that doesn't mean constant work and reevaluation externally. It's just a matter of me checking in my present state very often. How am
Yes.
I? Am I being a little too overly driven and masculine? Do I need to this? Like always trying to work towards a more neutral point. And I fail miserably a lot, but it's just to know what the extreme looks like. That either witness it in the world
I think that's fine. Yeah, I mean
by
that's that.
contrast, learning by contrast.
Yes. So it's connected, right? Like going back to the idea of the circle and the box and if you want to use symbols for the matter or focusing in and then coming back out. It's yin and yang. It's
Yeah.
simple, like going back again to the Tao. The Tao does represent the yin and yang. That's what the symbol actually is, even though some people might just call it the yin and yang. It really represents a matter of balance. And balance does not necessarily mean having the toxic things in your life. It's like I wouldn't balance myself touching a poisonous plant if I know I shouldn't touch the plant at all. It's like,
Right.
yeah, I need to balance myself touching poison. Like, no, you wouldn't touch the poison at all. You wouldn't do something evil at all. You don't balance evil. You balance the
Right.
things that are supposed to be balanced.
Right.
And that, you can look at as the left and right brain hemisphere, for example, some
Mhm.
people will use in science or other aspects of our life as well. You'll see there's always a need for balance. People will say this, even in diet, they'll say there's a balance that you need to achieve, not necessarily that they have to eat everything in the world and just have like little bits of everything, because that's kind of impossible. You can't really do that.
Right.
And so it depends. And they'll just say, oh, well, it's just carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Make sure you have a balance of all of these. It's like, well,
Yeah.
okay, but everyone's still different. So there's still a
Yeah.
balance of the body that needs to be considered in relationship to the balance of these foods. And, I think the best analogy when we were talking about focus is like being on your phone, right? And you're seeing this reality or virtual reality, and then you're coming out of it and you're seeing, well, this is the real reality, right? And it's like at
Yeah.
some point in time you can't keep your eyes on that device. At some point in time you have to look elsewhere, right? So we can get trapped onto these different things, but we have to be able to then expand outward. So it's not that it's a bad thing, it's just a
Right.
matter of, are you conscious enough to see the real world reality? It's like I'm not against technology just because my message is nature and I always talk about doing what is natural.
Mhm.
But it's a matter of understanding that that is what was there before this.
Yeah, yeah. To me, you're absolutely right. And I'm so glad that you said that because that is something we get caught up in, even if we're on or fully invested in a movement within ourselves, is to demonize the other. And again, I think that you and I may have a similar belief system within this, is like let's embrace paradox actually and kind of embrace that the opposite of maybe our perceived what we believe in nature, like you said, tech, it's not bad, it's just we have to learn how to wield something that exponentially is growing so quickly and to remember where we came from and all of the beauty and meaning it most often is coming from real world experience. And there's kind of that fine line between now that OpenAI became available. I mean, I don't know if how much you're on social media, but it was alarming over maybe last weekend when you'd see everybody doing those AI art photos of themselves. And I mean, it was just like everybody was doing these pictures of themselves. And my first thought was like, wow, this is going to cultivate an even higher level of narcissism, right? Like that was my first thought. But then I was like, wait, let me rationally kind of see this too, is that I'm sure this is going to be good for certain things. It's just how the people in charge wield that power, but then also how we individually, we can't lose our sovereignty with how we wield things that are happening within the universe. For me, it feels like we almost live in a time and place where anything is possible. It's like we have all options available almost. And we have to get real clear on ourselves and who we are to be able to navigate and not get sucked in to that metaverse and forget where we came from. And you see that in the world narratives nowadays. It's like, let's destroy all of our history. That to me is just ludicrous. Like, yes, there might need to be an evolutionary shift, but struggles with wrapping my head around certain people hijacking an ideology, a concept, and then immediately throwing it out into the world without doing any embodiment or integrating the experience of where that anger or frustration or movement is actually coming from. What do
Yeah.
you think about that?
I think of projection when you say that.
Yeah.
There is a lot of projection in the world. I mean, that is basically the role of social media is to project your thoughts to the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
And so, and especially since you don't have to confront anybody face to face to do it, you
Yeah.
type it on some device, you can basically type your insecurities away to some extent. And it's not really going to fix the problem because you're not facing it face to face necessarily, or with your own self or with somebody who can actually support you there in person as like a nurturing figure.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a mask, and that's what social media tends to be. It's like this is this identity I want to uphold, and the AI part can probably feed into that a little bit, right? That's what it
Yeah,
means,
definitely.
artificial intelligence. It's not intelligence, it's just a different type of intelligence, a
Right.
hijacked form of natural intelligence, as I
Right.
call it, because, there's this intelligence which created artificial intelligence, which is natural intelligence. Not a lot of people look at that because AI is the new greatest thing. Of course it's new because it's artificial.
Yeah.
Natural is always what has existed. So
Yeah.
it's not going to be seen as valuable unless people recognize that nature itself is valuable. And most people do. They just want to put more value on what's new because they can't live with nature, or uh they don't know how to live with nature. It's like, well, we have all these modern things. It's like they don't see a path out of it. It's
Yeah.
it's become part of their life. They feel like they need technology. They feel like they need AI, or it's like it's their way of escaping one day. Like, oh, the AI is going to solve all my problems, and this man-made drug is going to solve all my problems. But there comes the need again, where you get out of that focus and you look at the bigger picture. It's like, no, nature provides tons of medicines everywhere and tons of solutions, and
Yeah.
the solutions were always here. Were you there to look at it? And you're
Yeah.
right. When you see there's paradoxes in nature, I did a seminar back when I was in high school on nature is ironic, is what I call it at the time. And then over time, I learned about the Hermetic principles, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you saw the principle of polarity and the principle of correspondence. And
Mm-hmm.
these principles, which are usually, referred to as natural and universal, timeless principles, these principles tell you that there is this paradox in nature that if you cannot learn to accept the good and the bad, night
Mm-hmm.
and day,
Mm-hmm.
you won't be able to learn as much because you're
Mm-hmm.
not accepting it into your life as to say, wow, this is reality. We are going to deal with bad people. There's always going to be bad people. The question is, we don't have to allow that within our life. But we have to
Mm-hmm.
recognize that it's there. We can't just be in denial and say, oh, it's not there. It's like, well, then you're not going to be able to prevent it. You're not going to know how to treat it. So it's like, yeah, there's potential for everybody to get a disease, but there's also potential for you not to get disease. But at least you know that you can get disease. So how do you get disease? You wouldn't ask yourself how you would get the disease if you didn't see the disease as a possibility
Yeah,
to begin with.
exactly.
So it's just a matter of seeing the possibilities, which
Yeah.
requires opening the mind. And then that allows you to see all the paradoxes within. And those paradoxes are just little bits and pieces to the puzzle. That's all they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Cory, I want to ask you about transformation. And I
Mhm.
want to ask you, with this radical uptick in AI and people getting their dopamine from social media, what to me, when I got back connected more with myself and started to let myself experiment. And I saw in your bio, I think you have there that you say that you're an experimenter, which I feel very similar is like you said, you can't just pin one way of being or one medicine or one food group or one onto one person. I have discovered within myself that as I shift internally, I desire different things externally. And as I improve or heal or let go of what's not serving me and invite room for what is, I've changed a lot. I've had to remain very open and fluid because my transformation process required different things at different times. And I just want to ask you about this and your experience if you've had this. But as I started to fully commit and approach my life in that way, I had a defining moment where I was like, okay, this is how I'm always going to be. Like, I can't imagine that I'm going to get off of this path. I'm going to keep doing this work towards natural law and working on myself and showing up better. I needed to have a lot of room and space because I was purging myself and healing. And nature, being a part of nature and leaving room for my flexibility within all sorts of things, I believe cultivated this higher level of intelligence, which I would call like the divine mind of really understanding the right and the left brain and doing your work and understanding how your body's needs are slightly different. They're subtle at different times. I don't think people really understand the power that nature has to transform somebody's life. It's just like, oh, it's a painting. Look at the sky, so beautiful. But I think somehow that we're missing this big opportunity that actually
Question, like what
nature
is the
can
most
bring.
natural? So I mean it's one thing to think about, what naturally occurs, another to think about what naturally exists, and another to think about what is natural to use. I mean, these are three separate things, and
Mhm.
that's taking a really holistic worldview on it. But nonetheless, what you're mentioning and what comes to mind, because you asked about my personal experience as well within your question,
Yeah.
is, I was always an inventor when I was, since I was very young. I would take board games and everything that currently exists and transfer it into different formats. I would
Mm.
merge different games together. I would
Oh,
make my
interesting.
own shops. I would make my own libraries. I'd make my own schools. This is all stuff I did when I
Uh-huh.
was younger, and I would run through these simulations
Mm.
physically and mentally to see different possibilities. And when you discuss like this is a transformation among your direction, you have a direction. Your direction is care, right?
Mhm.
Mark
Mhm.
Passio would call it the generative principle, the principle
Mhm.
that basically leads to all the other principles and helps guide everything else. Well, it's true. When you have a direction, you care about yourself, then everything will come from it, or you have care similar to, again, care is not contracting, it's expanding, so you're
Yeah.
always open to new things. What you're doing is you're starting from a box, and then you have a circle, and then a box, a circle, box, circle, and you keep expanding. You realize, oh, I wasn't right here, I wasn't right here, I wasn't right here, I'm still not right. And you find out there's always more information that you can find out. You find out there's always more you can improve on. You find out there's a lot more you didn't see, and you find out you end up soon where you're like, wow, I have all this information, I never thought I'd end up here,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
you kept expanding and you kept improving upon yourself, and you were willing to, which
Yeah.
is where the care comes in, where the
Yeah.
consciousness comes in, where the, yes, you originally expanded and you're willing to keep expanding and you're not willing to stop. You're willing to continually grow upon yourself because everything's constantly changing. And so you're really just going with that change in nature. And you're not trying to change anything. You're going
Mhm.
with it, like you said, because you realize what nature provides you is that consciousness, that ability to care. And it
Mhm.
really is putting everything on the forefront for you. If you have a problem, you're going to be faced with a trauma. If you do something you know you're not supposed to do, you're going to be faced with guilt. These things are here as a reminder as to
Mhm.
what we should do in finding our direction. And then even if you say, well, this person doesn't have trauma, this person doesn't have guilt, it's like that still happens for a reason. Like nature programs us a certain way where one way or another, we're going to have to express our conscience or improve upon our
Mhm.
current conscience so we
Mhm.
know what we should do and what we should not do. Right.
Mhm.
So it's like at this point, most people know it's like they should breathe, they should not enslave one another, they should not commit violence upon another. Although back, you go a couple years ago, it's like, well, you can't breathe unless you put on a mask on. Or you go further back, it's like, oh, well, you can't have a farm without some slaves. It's like, some people will say that as if it's natural to have these things
Mhm.
on, have slaves, or natural to have a mask on. And it's like, is that really the most natural condition? So it's a matter of expanding past that box. It's like, wow, no, there's something more beyond that. And you don't
Yeah.
see it if you're grown into the world wearing a mask. Like, let's say you're like a baby, and this is the case for today's generation to some extent. They might be born into the world and they're wearing a mask since day one. So they don't see a reality without it. The same way where
Mhm.
we might have technology or artificial intelligence, and we have it so long with us and we have so much dependence into it where we don't see a possibility without it unless we truly expand our mind or see the other options and experience it. It's like the person who
Mhm.
lives in the city and they never seen the natural, country life. And so they just, they think, oh, well, it's not really that important. It's just a bunch of trees and stuff. But then they
Mhm.
actually go to the country life and their sleep improves and all this stuff improves. And they start to see there are stark differences between the two, and
Hmm.
one was always there before the other. So
Right.
it's just a matter of seeing that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I love talking to you, Cory. It's so
It's
interesting.
innovating, right?
It,
Like you cannot invent to begin with. It's funny because I criticize all the man-made stuff, but as an inventor myself, that's what you do is you
yeah.
you take from nature, you take from what is currently there, and you improvise. You don't create anything, you improvise. You're taking what's
Hmm.
already there and changing its form to turn it
Right.
into something else. And that's why some of the best inventions are like really simple ideas
Mm.
that are just like people feel like, well, I could have thought about that.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's like simple. You're just changing some things here and there. And then
Hmm.
over time, of course, it can become complex, like where we have computers and technology, which is like a combination of so many other types of inventions. And if we don't know how we created that to where we are currently, it can cause some problems because then we need to go back to our roots. We're going to have to, because it's like, well, okay, it's gotten so advanced. We don't know how it got to where it is. In order to
Yeah.
improve, we need to understand how it got there. So that's
Right.
that's a separate scenario, but
That like
it's
exponential growth without really monitoring the process. Right. Right.
yes, it's like again, like going back to the zooming in and zooming out type of scenario.
Right, right. So you brought something up that I want to talk about, which is creativity and inventing
Mhm.
this energy. It's funny because I've discovered within myself that moments when I'm not committed or I haven't been committed to my own inner process, like something subconsciously knows that you're desiring something, and you start to kind of usurp or other people's energy, or you start to talk bad or got like you get into this downward spiral because you don't have that generative principle to be able to self source your own creativity and energy. And for me, getting in touch with nature and living naturally, which again, that word has also slightly been usurped. Most things now aren't natural that say that they're natural, as you said, but really helped me to like evoke this full creative force. And I think that even amongst people that I know within the freedom movement is sometimes I think we get so kind of hell bent on changing reality and focusing on the slavery outside that we don't really understand that inner process and what it's going to take to cultivate the creativity to put your alchemical gold out in a way that people are going to hear you and not feel threatened by you. So for me, at one point, I did this too, where I was like, I got to wake everybody up. How am I going to do this? And it just wasn't a mature way of being a steward of this, sharing your beliefs with the world and being a model of that demonstration.
Sure. I think it's a good question. I do want to start off by saying that I think women are prone to having anger too. I mean,
Oh,
obviously,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
There's a lot, there's anybody out there. I've seen people who are angry, who are moms, they go up to
Oh,
the school
yeah.
board and they're like, I can't believe what you're doing to my children, in the
No, you're
schools.
absolutely right.
And that you can see their masculine energy come out,
Mhm.
and they can take it to an extreme. So
Absolutely.
I wouldn't limit it to just men for sure. And I know you're not, that's not what you're implying, but
Mhm.
it's just something that I think, looking at a human point of view, you can say it's the balance between the masculine and feminine, but for myself, I've had struggles with that. I think everybody has struggles with that,
Mhm.
right? It's like, okay, how do you express yourself without getting angry?
Mhm.
How do you express yourself while, going down the right path for the right conversation? Like, because you have to consider every conversation is a new conversation. Like every person you talk to is a new person. So you don't really know them unless you connect with them. And this is why I usually tend to use questions. I think
Yeah.
questions are the best strategy for not just your own internal improvement, but for the improvement of others. If you have something to say about them, if you have a judgment about them, an expectation, or what have you, because
Mhm.
even if you make a judgment or an expectation about someone else, you still don't have a strong judgment against them. Even if you are like 100% certain, like this person is doing this, it's like, you're not them. You don't know
Exactly.
exactly what they're thinking or what's going on inside their mind. You can ask them questions and find out more and more, but still, they are the one that needs to figure out themselves. As you know, it's like you can't really heal another person. They have to do
Right.
that healing themselves one way or another. I mean, you can help them, you can guide them, but they still have to be the one that take the path. So
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to talking with others or sharing your thoughts with others, it's more so that you focus on yourself, because if you are a good influence upon yourself, you will be a good influence upon others. I mean, this is
Mm-hmm.
how self-care works, right? You
Mm-hmm.
give care to yourself, care will naturally radiate to others. Other people will feel it. They will see that energy. And maybe that sounds like new agey or whatever, but I think it's generally speaking what makes sense, because if you are healthy, people are going to see that you're healthy. It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
you can't really avoid that, especially when other people are unhealthy. They're going to see that, and it's going to be like a beacon of light to them. And
Mm-hmm.
so they will attract to you. You don't have to be calling to them. You don't need to be saying anything. I mean, they will ask you,
Yeah.
and that conversation can go quite well. So when people see freedom in action, when all these people in the freedom movement, they want to share freedom,
Mm-hmm.
if they want to share freedom with people and there are people who really are shut out to that freedom, the
Mm-hmm.
best thing you can do is keep following that path of freedom. Find people who are already like-minded with you, and find
Mm-hmm.
people who have the same goals and desires. Stop trying to change everybody who, doesn't have that goal and desire,
Right.
but
Right.
be there for them. And that way,
Right.
when they see you in your progression and in your evolution, they will see that and compare it to their own life in their own head, and they will start to see a better alternative that they can
Right.
partake in, because you're accepting them, you're inviting them, and you never imposed it upon them. You never said, this is what you have to do, because that would scare them away.
Yeah. Did you ever the Buckminster Fuller quote? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where it says, basically it says, don't waste all of your energy trying to destroy the old. Make something so powerful within your, whatever your mission is, that it naturally starts to fill those voids of what the old was. And that's one thing that I see, is that a lot of times we're still fighting out there, the old, when we could be
Yeah.
utilizing that energy, like you said, to find the right people to create the things that we want to see replace that which we are fighting. And I've discovered for myself that if I'm in that mode, because I can fall into that mode too, it's usually because I'm out of alignment within myself somewhere. And
Yes,
I'm trying to demonize
exactly.
something outside of me so I feel better about myself.
Totally. This is
Right.
something that a lot of people are prone for in the, truth movement, freedom movement, is they see a lot of what's going on in the world, and they're like, I'm the only person with this knowledge. And soon they start to build up a sense of ego around that,
Yeah.
and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
gosh, everybody needs to know about this. No one knows about this. And, you know, and it causes a lot of problems if you're not conscious enough to take a step back from that world. Again, it's take a step back from that rabbit hole, which you
Mm-hmm.
cannot expect everybody to understand, because you yourself did not understand that a couple years back. You got to put yourself in your old shoes, nonetheless other people's shoes, right? And that
Right.
is a matter of, like, again, expanding back to like origin, is like you're born into a world where day one you're propagated to learn certain things and think certain ways. So you cannot really blame somebody for thinking a certain way, although they might want to stay ignorant. You can say,
Yeah.
okay, well, I should blame them. Well, yes, but just as much as you probably shouldn't, because they have no control over their own thoughts at a really, really young age, where
Right.
they're being
Right.
propagated into that world. So, the thing is we're not fighting anybody. There is no fight. We're all in the same reality.
Yeah.
There is no fighting. It's just a matter of where we put our embrace. Like, most people,
Yeah.
they care about certain things in their life. They say, I care about my job, I care about my family, or I care about this or that. And they just place all their energy into certain resources that they can just
Right.
place somewhere else. It's already
Right.
there. They already have care, they already have knowledge. They're just choosing where they want to put it. So we can say, oh,
Right.
they're ignorant, they're in fear. It's like they're not going to live their entire life in fear. Otherwise, they'd be doing nothing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be alive. If they have some sense of love or care for anything, then they have something, some sense
Right.
of attachment to something. And therefore, you can find it within them as to what do they care about? What do they
Yeah.
love about? Is it their health? Is it their family? Everybody has that, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, like,
Mm-hmm.
even if the term nature has been hijacked, it still doesn't matter. Even the term right and wrong has been hijacked, it still doesn't matter. And we know moral relativism doesn't really matter anyways. But nonetheless, it's because people have an intuitive sense of what is right and wrong, an intuitive sense of what is natural. And you can tune into that. You can
Right.
bring that out of an individual if through
Mm-hmm.
enough questions and through being there with them.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody's the enemy. Nobody we're fighting. Everybody is here, helping each other. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this is where you can bring non-resistance in,
Mm-hmm.
another old abolitionism type of ideology. But it's the idea that even violence in the case of self-defense is not necessary. This is the idea of like you don't need to be angry to
Mm-hmm.
to solve the problems or retaliate. You don't need to retaliate. You can
Mm-hmm.
you can be on a higher moral ground by
Mm-hmm.
standing your ground and simply being yourself and letting others see that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there is more moral wisdom to be found in the silent, in the present, in the quiet, rather
Mm-hmm.
than the loud, the angry, and such.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Corey, so much. And it feels like this choice point of whether we're going to do the work so we can live in accordance with our higher angels over the lower ones. And it just, that's to me what it feels like. And I get caught up too at times, not always making the perfect choice. So to see that we all are a little more similar than we'd like to admit, I believe. And this, when you were talking about the communication, what that brought up within me is that how could we possibly, I would never want to be judged on one conversation that I had with somebody. There's always something preceding that conversation, a whole story. And then there's always how I deal with the situation afterwards. Like communication in general could be considered, it should be a holistic process, not just how could you even, for me, it boggles my mind at times that we actually communicate as well as we do, because there's so much else going on and layers within our own fields that it needs radical improvement. But I think that that improvement just comes when we start being honest and stop trying to be perfect. And again, be more simple or take more times within presence of awareness than constantly trying to perfect or one up somebody. Just confrontational was seen as very unenlightened, right? This. It's like, oh, she's not enlightened if she's angry. And at some point it's like, I'm a human.
Right.
I'm actually just a human, and I think we're all human. And I think at some point to just say, this hurt me. Is that what you meant? Like you said, the questioning I found so beneficial. What did you mean when you said that? Instead of just reacting, learn
Right.
to respond and just say, be like a child, be innocent. That hurt my feelings. Is that how you meant it? Instead of cultivating all these layers of confusion. And then, to me, it
Yeah.
seems like that's how the wars start.
Yeah. Anger doesn't really phase me, I'll be honest. Like not and I'm not an angry person. I barely get angry, but when I see anger in other people or I see so-called radical ideas being
Uh-huh.
shared by other people, to me, it's like any other idea because I'm not
Mm,
taking it through the lens of here's this person who is angry. I'm looking deeper at their intent usually. I'm looking at their thoughts and
mm,
what they're thinking.
right.
So it's like what's going on in their own mind?
Analyzing it a little deeper.
Yeah, and it's like, Mark, for example, Mark Passio, he can tend to get very angry in some of his
Mhm.
talks, but in other talks, he's very calm and very collected. And, it
Yeah.
can depend on the day, it could depend on certain things, and you can also consider all that. But what is the information? Does he have the right to be angry? Is there a
Yeah.
lot of people who aren't listening? And that anger is bringing in a lot more people. Now
Yeah.
that those people may not express that anger in the same way he's expressing that anger,
Hmm.
but nonetheless it's bringing in people because they feel that energy. So I'm
Yeah.
not against people being angry or having that, looking at what's wrong, but it's a matter of realizing you don't have to focus on what's wrong, you don't have to focus
Don't
on what's
live
right.
there. Yeah, you don't have to
Exactly.
live there. Right. With Mark, it's so interesting because I want to say this. I when I first became attracted to Mark's work, which was about 7 years ago, um, there was a lot of, anger and righteousness that can come through. And I needed that at a
Mm,
particular time within my life. It woke me, it cultivated an energy, the anger, cultivated an energy that I was able to transform into motivation. And I
Right.
think that's one thing that's kind of important. Whenever I've hung out in emotions too long, it gets sticky, right? But like you said, also, I've also seen Mark, and I see it a lot. I'm a part of his How to Become the True Media this session, and I've really been able to listen to him and his ability to not be in that angry state and to troubleshoot with people and walk people through things that seem like I would think, well, Mark should definitely be getting angry at this point with this person's like question that's taking them a half an hour to figure out something simple. In the moments when it really matters, he's actually, from what I've witnessed, very composed. Like when it's really important and it's like an environment of care, to me, that's so like an attractive quality within a masculine energy. I'm like, oh my gosh, actually, he's radically patient. He's
Good
like,
point.
there's all of these things where I'm like, I don't know that enough people get to see this side of him where he's really embodying these qualities that a lot of people, I think, struggle attaining that level of patience and troubleshooting. And I think he gets that from his career in doing like computer software work, right? But
Mhm.
beautiful contrast of like the need to sometimes be angry, but then also to see that that person has this other side that's like radically in it and really patient without getting angry at all. Do you feel within yourself, you said you've never really felt anger. Do you feel like you were kind of born that way? That's like a characteristic that you were born with?
I just haven't had many experiences where I've had to feel it. I'm
Mm,
sure I've had, and I can think of different experiences. But it's not something that I let hold me back. Like you said, you didn't put all your eggs in one basket to like focus on it. It's like some
yeah.
people who ask me like, what shadow work have you done? It's like I'm sure I've done tons of shadow work. I know I have, but
Yeah.
I don't put so much focus on it that I don't even recall what exactly took place, to be honest, because I put it so
Yeah.
behind me at this point and I already
Yeah.
faced it and I already went through it. And it's like
Yeah.
at that point, it's like you just realize you got to keep evolving. You can move past it. And that goes for any sort of like trauma or anything like that. It's like, yeah, you can live with it for a large part of your life, but once you face it and address it, it's over. It's
Doesn't
like
have to be like a point in your story that remains this is where I find in the certain communities and even in the medical establishment we
mm,
propagate this victim mentality. Oh, now I have this and this and now I'm creating support groups about my illness. It's like, is that what you want to, does that make you happy attaching to that storyline?
yeah. Again, it's like the abolitionism minus the integration. It's like, well,
Exactly.
how could you get rid of something without bringing something in as what's good, as opposed to what's bad? It's like the whole point of recognizing what's bad is for what's good. So why wouldn't good be the focus?
Yeah.
But then the New Age community will say, let's just focus on all that's good and not look at what's bad. And it's like,
Right. Right. I had read somewhere, I forget where it was, but they said that integration has been a very occulted practice. That it's like one of the main core principles that have been really obfuscated from reality is like understanding how to transmute where you have been victimized or where the pain lies within you. And I could see how somebody might feel most powerful and in control and safe in their victim mentality if they've never really understood a demonstration of what integration can offer you. Is it transmutes the pain, it shifts the perception into a place where you can extract something even better than the pain. And I'm just wondering, like, when did you really hear about integration and how, like, if somebody have never heard of the word integration, like, how would you describe that?
yeah, I learned about it through integrative nutrition,
Mm,
studying nutrition and realizing, well, there is a connection there. But other than that, like you said previously, learning that everything is connected, you can say is just a form of learning integration.
mm,
That is how I would look at integration, is the fact that everything is connected. So with that knowledge, it's like am I looking at all those bits and pieces? Otherwise, I
Yeah.
don't really have it the whole picture. I don't have it really figured out. And even when you do think you have it figured out, like I said before, you still haven't figured it out, but at least you have it more figured out than the people who do focus on the bits and pieces. Although they might be really good on their expertise, but that's why you learn from them, and then you learn from others, and then you learn from everybody, and you can see people in their own fields, and then that's why there is that balance where it's like, oh, you're somebody in the healthcare system who sees there's people in a certain mindset. That's why you're here. Like that's
Yeah.
why you're doing what you're doing, is because you see something that they don't, because they're so stuck in it they can't see otherwise. But that's
Right.
why you're there, to help them and help other people, so that way more perspective gets around. That's basically your role. My role as well is like to bring these ideas to the public. A lot of what I'm sharing, not a lot of people are doing what I'm doing. There are these bits and pieces over here that nobody's touching, and everybody's touching these bits and pieces. So it's
Right.
like, if you're going to
Right.
bring these together, that's a matter of integration.
Right. It's really, I love that. When I think of nature, I think of endless potential and possibility. And
Mhm.
if we were to mentally understand or realize that there's endless perspective, actually, and yes, there might be a lot of shadow and inappropriate perspective, but like we aren't even close. Like I think if this humility came back in, we aren't even close to understanding what is actually going on out there in the world of potential, in the universe of potential. So if we would just contain that humility and always seek to find outside perspective, just be humble and like a child again, like want to learn, want to grow.
That really
I
holds
mean,
us
I
back. And
just,
that's,
mhm.
how when I asked a lot of people, like, how do you define slavery? And I created this huge event called the End of Slavery Summit with
Yep.
about 50 speakers. I mean,
Hmm.
each person basically said something along the lines of, it's restricting somebody's freedom. Like,
Right,
that's basically what it is. And
right.
so you can be enslaved to a disease that takes over your body, and you can't do anything about it because it's taken over.
Hmm.
Although you probably shouldn't have the mentality that it's taken over your whole body and there's nothing you can do about it, because
Right.
maybe there's something you can do about it. And that's where we're at when it comes to freedom. If somebody cares about freedom, is, do you care about freedom? Even if you look at the world around you and you feel like everything's hopeless, if you don't care about it and you don't feel a
Mm,
sense of faith or a sense of hope,
mm,
there is no way out of it. It's like, we see how powerful the mind is when it comes to healing disease, and we
hmm,
see that the principle of mentalism and natural law hermetic principles is what
hmm,
creates everything in the world.
hmm,
Then how powerful is the mind for creating freedom? It's exactly that, which is why education and creating books is so important for me,
hmm.
because these things will always exist, and it's just a matter of what people choose to do with it. It's a tool. It's a resource.
Yeah.
It's not, it could be used for good or for bad, but really, if it's speaking about slavery and most people see slavery as wrong, I'm building upon what their previous or their current knowledge of slavery is. So most people think it's ball and chain, African American type of slavery here in America. Although slavery has existed in every part of the world. So what I'm doing is, I'm saying that's a claim of ownership over
Hmm.
another human being. That's what it's always been. The abolitionists said it themselves. I have tons of quotes within the book. More than half the book is just quotes.
Hmm.
And the other half is asking questions. It's literally in question answer format. So you can ask yourself those questions and then connect it to other questions.
Hmm.
And so it defines, first, what is slavery? The claim of ownership over somebody who doesn't belong to you, or, like I said before, the restriction of freedom. They're all essentially connected. You can say it's stealing something from somebody else, whether it's their property or themselves or their children or what have you. Um, because back then that was the case too. If you were born into a certain slave family, you're automatically a slave, and all these crazy practices. And so, it's a matter of understanding responsibility, ownership, and getting really just in touch with first principles, people would call it, or
Hmm.
principles that deal with who we are as human beings. And again, that
Hmm.
always is improving, but it's really simple because most people would agree with it. If I ask them, I say, do you
Hmm.
own yourself? It's like, yeah, of course I own myself. But
Hmm.
back then it's
Hmm.
like, the slaves did not own themselves. Like, they didn't
Hmm.
have any autonomy over themselves. It's like, sorry, could I get a permission receipt? I can't talk to you. It's like, oh, I need to go to that plantation, but I can't without permission. And it's like,
Hmm.
it's interesting because today we're asking for permission to go place to place, here to there. We can't travel everywhere.
Hmm.
We're taxed against our will.
Hmm.
Because if we choose not to pay those taxes, coercion will be used against us. So is it not theft? And, these questions I spark in individuals. Taxation is used as a very prime example because you're literally claiming that you own something that you don't. Like, this is money that you earned. And here's some people who are saying, this is my money now. It's like, because of why? Because I wrote it on a piece of paper because I said
Hmm.
so. It's like, that's no different from a thief. It's taking your money. They're just making it sound justified by putting it on a piece of paper and giving
Right.
themselves an identity, which makes it
Right.
even worse because if people believe that that's actually true, then it legitimizes the theft. It makes the
Yeah.
theft actually seem like it's necessary, if not moral or proper for society. And
Mm.
that's what most people are actually looking at taxation as. When it comes to justifying it. People are
Hmm.
look at it and say, well, yeah, we need it because if we don't, steal from certain people for this benefit, then everybody's going to be in disorder. They make these generalizations. Like, if the
Hmm.
individual does not get violated, the collective, the greater good will somehow cease to have order. And
Yeah.
so it's like, are you sure about that? So in my book, Radical Honesty, for instance, I show that if you cannot be on the path of honesty and you go toward the path of lying. So in this case, the lie that you have, that you can steal something that doesn't belong to you. You're basically lying to yourself, or you're
Right.
justifying the fact that you can do that. When you follow a lie, you lead to an unknown conclusion. You don't know where you're going. And so
Hmm.
if you're saying the individual has to be violated for the collective, it's like, what collective? Like, who? Like, what
Yes.
exactly is being
Great
done? You don't
question.
know. And it's just confusion. And it's like, oh, well, I assume it's the collective and it's greater good, but you don't really know. It's like, if you ask the person, where's your tax money going? It's like, I don't know. I'm hoping it goes toward the roads. I'm hoping it goes to, but then, like, would you rather just voluntarily pay on your own toward the things that you want?
Right.
And somebody will probably say, actually, yeah, because I wouldn't want to use violence. Like, if you ask
Hmm.
them after that, you say, would you want to use violence? It's like, no.
Hmm.
So then, yeah, you would want people to voluntarily pay. You would want people to
Right.
choose what services and what goods they want because you clearly don't want this benefit, but this person clearly wants this benefit. So, like, you can't make somebody do something they don't want to do. I mean,
Hmm.
this is health 101, is it not?
Hmm.
It's like
Hmm.
it's like you can't tell someone like you have to go on this diet. If they really don't want to do it, then don't do it. And even if they don't want to do it at all, it's like, why are you making them do it?
Hmm.
This is all the same deal with freedom, right? We connected these
Hmm.
terms before. So slavery gone for good is just breaking down the basics, and then people can expand upon that. That's the whole goal.
I love that you're putting this education out into the world and this critical thinking way of getting people to understand. Because again, I think that we've been, brainwashed, so to speak. Like you said, oh well, of course we're hoping, and the government's going to take care of that, and that's not the case. We're finding that is radically the opposite, actually, of what's happening. So we have to get out of the brainwash. We have to really look in the mirror and do this work and be willing to change and leave room to transform. And when we our thoughts, I wrote this today, when our thoughts have become concretized, when we feel like, oh, the government's going to do that or that, you have no room to really see a perception shift. So just that fluidity of understanding, I may not have been taught properly, I may be brainwashed or conditioned to believe something that's not true, and let me take the steps personally to educate myself, because it is important for not only myself, but for the future generations to have something that I feel like I was a part of cultivating that was healthy and natural. And I think that that's often where I've gotten frustrated in the past, has been the projection of, well, people are comfortable within themselves, but who is thinking about the future generations? How did we get so narcissistic and selfish that if I'm okay and my family's okay, I'm not going to do anything about it? And it's just easier to escape when I feel stressed and live that normal matrix life. And, that's where I love the idea of holistic thinking, and to look at nature, because nature's always concerned about the recycling process and the next generations coming. It's like we are a part of something much broader and much bigger than just ourselves and why we're here.
Yeah, and obviously, ending slavery took several thousand years. It would take a good amount of time to end other forms as well. And that's what I'm claiming is that there's other forms of slavery that exist. And part of that evolution, like you're mentioning, which comes, back to everything we talked about before, is seeing the possibility that, yes, we are enslaved in other ways. How do we know that? Well, let's just apply the same definition that we used in the 1800s
Yeah.
and actually look at the people from the 1800s and see what they were saying. And they were
Yeah.
saying these things. These guys were some of the first freedom fighters after the
Yeah.
American Revolution. They were looking at it, they were saying, wait, the government is not protecting our rights. They claim to
Hmm.
protect our rights. They claim that we, the people, are we, the people, but we never signed that document. We never gave our consent.
Right.
It seems like government is always doing the opposite of protecting our rights, basically
Right.
always violating them. So
Hmm.
is it really true that governments are formed to protect people's rights? And these are the questions that, yes, that we ask to innovate because people take it for granted. They think, oh, well, government exists to protect rights. It's like, are you sure about that?
Hmm.
It's like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how they blatantly often confuse us with, like doctrines and all of to me, I always felt that the truth was always revealed to me in actually quite a simplistic way. Nature is not that complex. It does what it does and it's obvious. It's right there in front of your face. It's not having you read, I don't know, 100 pages of something to apply for a loan and you're like, I'm so confused. Let me just sign this. I mean, I always felt, and I live my life now by that. If I can't read if I don't know the ingredients, if this document seems completely irrational and crazy, like I'm gonna just move away. I'm not gonna participate. And I think that's another good base strategy is
right.
don't participate in something that insults your soul or you can't understand. Just don't do it. There's
Yeah.
something probably behind it that's not good for you.
Yeah. Talk about the importance of knowledge and consciousness. Well, it's like right there, you're signing something you don't know. And because you don't
Exactly.
know it, you're doing it. It's like, well, that's the worst thing you can do because then you aren't on a direction. And it's like, oh, we'll have a direction. I'm just signing the paper. It's not going to do anything. It's like, you don't know what you just signed. How do you know it's
Cory,
not going to do anything?
I love that you said that. You're not on a clear direction. I
Hmm.
think that I realized as I was coming through this, and I want to ask you is I was winging it in so many aspects of my life when I was younger and just doing what everyone else was doing or I was taught to do, doing the work, natural law, deconditioning myself, inner work, committing to this has gave me radical direction and purpose and it's clear. And I just look around and I feel like I think this is what people are kind of seeking is
Yes.
they want meaning, they want a direction, they want to be working for something that's going to be beneficial. But we have to first, I think, realize that we actually have been living without that direction, just funneled into these areas of government or what slavery, however that looks. And we have to consciously say, I want to be a radical participant in my own life's experience at this point. And I want direction. I want meaning. I want structure, not just to be winging it. And I just, this work has given me so much purpose and direction that I wish everybody could have a taste of that because you don't feel enslaved anymore. For me personally, let me ask you, how do you feel about your own enslavement? Even though the world is as it is, do you feel enslaved?
Um, I've gotten tastes of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can get tastes of it the more you press against the powers that be.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you do things that they don't want you to do,
Mm-hmm.
start to see I'm not as free as you think you are, especially in America, where you're supposed to have freedom of speech, you're supposed to have the right to bear arms, and all these things they say that you're supposed to have. It's like
Mm-hmm.
they, which is we. So it's like kind of confusing. And
Yeah.
that's exactly because the system is built on confusion. That's how they keep people controlled. It's built on
Right.
fear and confusion. So I have to be confused, especially as a new
Mm-hmm.
generation. If there's something that I have to encapsulate this generation and my generation, it has to be some sense of confusion, which is why direction and purpose and meaning, like you said, is so important because it
Mm-hmm.
takes people out of that confusion, which
Mm-hmm.
I still have within myself. Because if you're in this world where it's like you don't know where you're heading in your future, and I have a hard time socializing with people my age, and I'm very honest about that. It's like they're on smartphones half the time, or they're in the, in that
Yeah.
system, and they don't want to see it anywhere else. They don't even give it their time and energy or effort. I'm going to have some struggles with myself because I see that
Mm,
they're not fulfilling my expectations. But should I have
mm,
expectations of them? Or should I
mm,
continue seeking out the people who care, like yourself and other
mm.
people, and then naturally find more people? And that's where I'm putting my time and energy, right? So that's a matter of finding direction. It's like, don't place all your energy and time into things that you know are not going to help you, or
Yeah.
help the world. And people who are cops, law enforcement, all these people in government, they really have to consider that. It's like, these politicians spend so much money on political campaigns and all this stuff. Is it really what's going to help the world? You're taking
Yeah. Yeah.
people's money for these causes. You're basically throwing their money away if you fail. And you don't even know if you're going to be able to do everything that you say you want to do. And then all
Yeah.
these cops are doing what they're told to do. And what if there's something that you don't agree with? Are you not
Mm,
going to be a cop anymore? Do you have a second career option? Like, these questions aren't considered in the person
mm.
who doesn't really ask these questions or care to ask those questions, and have a direction based on honesty. Those systems are based on lies. That's
Yeah.
how they exist.
Yeah.
And I'm proving that through my works. And of course, it takes some time to understand for people because,
Hmm.
again, you're built into that system, like
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
somebody who basically upholds it.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it's a process. It certainly is.
Corey, you brought so much up. We might have to speak again at another time because one thing I wanted to ask you is do you think that there is a generational responsibility? Because you were, and I'm thinking of you, you're a little younger than me. And I was thinking what you're saying is the exact thing I know from friends of mine who are in your generation. And I got to feel that that has to feel a little bit weighty for you potentially. But then, like you said, kind of balancing and weighing and kind of going through this process of do I just find the people who do care, but also like at some point, age wise, generationally, like I would like my generation to stand up.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. I don't know many people in my generation yet, but I am running into more and more people, right?
Great.
Obviously through my networking and through what I'm doing online. I would
Mm-hmm.
like to do more in real life, and I'm going to be continuing to do that. So my
Great.
priorities are never ending. My goals are never
Yeah.
ending.
Great.
And I would actually like to appeal to all people. I know they
Mm-hmm.
may not listen. Well, if
Yeah.
you want them to heal, you have to have some care for them, right? It's like you have to have some faith
Yeah.
because it starts them on that process. But you
Yeah.
can't invest all your time and energy into it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I realized is, again, the subtle different approaches that we can embody doing this work. And, if when you're coming out of the brainwash, you're coming out of the matrix, right? It can be shocking and alarming, especially, I don't want to say especially because I don't know exactly, but I would assume for the older generations who've been really indoctrinated and have based their entire life
yes.
off of these false premises, it can be deadly when they start to wake up and really realize I contributed my whole life's work and experience and I've sacrificed so much for this lie. And I feel as though this component of care and love is, like you said, even if people are stubborn or they're not listening to you or they're not ready, is to always keep a crack in the door open for care and love. Because I've learned in my reality and through myself and others is that there have been people I thought would never change and did. And I was like, wow, like this person actually made a
Right.
huge turnaround. And this is something that I'm trying to share more and more and more with in the aspects of healthcare is like people can heal. Like let's give them room in this diagnosis and see what can happen in that field. So just trying to, like you said, care and love, that provides so much, because usually under all that anger is just an unloved child or an unloved
Yes.
somebody who doesn't feel worthy or loved. So
Hmm.
I like to, as we proceed in with aspects of the freedom movement is, that radical importance of someone who's showing up with care and love, even when you're in a dark place.
Yes. Well, again, that goes back to the idea of non-resistance. It's like, so let's say someone wants to do violence upon you. You might want to use self-defense and use violence upon them to retaliate.
Yeah.
Or is there another option? Because people tend to leave that option out if they feel
Yeah.
like self-defense is the most justified and I should always have my gun with me and protect myself. We can tend to get trapped in that ideology as well, especially if you're coming from America and you're like, yeah, guns are so important and that's why we're free. And hey, you're not wrong. But guess what?
Hmm.
There's still another option, which is the peaceful route. As much as possible, invite them. Say, hey, why do you want to do violence to me? What is it that I can do for you? Could I provide you with something? Is there something you need? Imagine just the person standing there wanting to do violence to you, like their response, because they're expecting you to be in fear. They want you to
They
have
want
a
that fight. Yeah.
yes. And
Yeah.
if you were to come at them with a different approach, it would be interesting. And this is when you start reading some of the abolitionists from the 1800s, they make very strong arguments for non-resistance, which people would call today as pacifism.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that I'm a pacifist. I'm saying look at the value in it, because again, you can't like just discount it and saying it's all
Mm.
not important, but it's
Yeah.
treating evil, with love, and it's applying the golden rule 100% with no exception. It's like treat others the way you want to be treated, period. No exception. There's no saying, okay, well, you can violate this rule here because you're being violated. It's like, no, maybe it's not the best solution even still, because let's
Yeah.
say, there's something going on and you retaliate in self-defense. Somebody else doesn't know what's going on. They think you're the one who caused the violence. And,
Yeah. You
and
know,
so there's so
oh,
many scenarios, weird things like that, where if people aren't looking higher at different perspectives, you can cause more problems than actual solutions.
yeah, the mirroring, I've done a lot of kind of mirror work. And what's very interesting about that is you're right, is I think in interactions and group dynamics, we expect people, we unconsciously are like expecting to have mirror experiences where I'm trying to learn about myself through what you're projecting at me. It's like we're projecting and we're learning from what we're being projected upon, which is like a mirror. But you're right, that is not always the highest reality. So it's if you can use that discernment, sometimes a mirror might be necessary, but sometimes the better thing to do is again to choose that higher angel and to see that person's projections onto you, and they want to learn about themselves by that fight that they're trying to have you meet within them. But it's dysregulating if you show up differently, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of like, oh, and that can sometimes piss people off more, or it can completely open up space for something different. And I really see this and have utilized this a lot within personal relationship, is really not meeting somebody with their anger, is to recognize my reaction that wants to come forth, but then to say no. Let's do you want to get to the heart of the matter, or do you just want to have a cycling fight that like we always end up coming back to the same karmic issues, or do you want to
Right.
really want to know what's going on and see how you need to improve upon yourself and they them, and kind of just get to the heart of the matter. And then you take an argument that's lasted 20 years and you can nip something in the butt within 2 days if you choose to.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to the idea of presence and what we talked about before, because, being present and simply accepting is sort of similar to not really retaliating and letting things be, because some people, again, want that reaction. They're looking for it. They want you to be angry. It's like it helps them feel better to see you angry. And I know it sounds really weird, but that's sort of how projection works. And people
Mm-hmm.
want to see you have a certain reaction so they can get a certain way out of that. It's like the Hegelian dialectic. You put a solution, problem, react, solution. You put a problem,
Mm-hmm.
then you create a
Mm-hmm.
solution, and then you create an antithesis out of that
Right.
synthesis.
Yeah. Like when I was a part of more of the new age community, I mean, there were a lot of concepts within that community that were great. It's just that they
Like that,
became
yeah.
really extreme. But they would say there's this energy transference happening where you're trying to release what's yours and onto somebody else and make it their responsibility. It's like this shift of energy where you're becoming that succubus, right? That like that energy taker by projecting onto them what you need to work on within yourself. You feel better about yourself temporarily, but then someone else who may be considered the empath absorbs that negativity and wonders why they feel awful all of the time
Hmm.
because they're allowing they're not strong enough, that maybe the darker side of the passivity, which is like,
Yeah.
I'm not standing up for my boundaries here. I would love to see you talk about, or maybe we can come back and do something on the concepts of passivity and where it's necessary and important, and then what it looks like in its altered state of not being in balance, which is like I'm passive and not making any boundaries or
Right.
taking any action. Because I see a lot of people in the world talk about the passive masculine, right? And I think collectively you
Hmm.
can really see that there is a high proportion of women who are embodying that anger, like you said, like they're usurping the masculine kind of energy, and then
Hmm.
the men are passive. But you're
Yeah.
right, it's like there's nuance there that needs to be actually clarified.
It's shifting. You can clearly see in the world people are like, we're mad at the feminists, and then you have the Andrew Tates of the world. They're like, no, we're gonna be the anti-feminist, and it's like you're gonna see this balance and clash, and people are gonna be behind the scenes using it for their agendas because that's what happens. but but you're right.
Yeah.
There's value to be seen in everything, and that's what somewhat makes it also dangerous because the reason why people fall for new age or fall for, I'm pro Second Amendment, I'm all about, guns as well. It's like, to me, these are both extremes and they both have value, which is why people follow them. That's what I'm saying. So, like, I'll interview a lot of people. A lot of them will say, like yourself, like, I came from the new age community. Not a surprise to me because
Mm-hmm.
there was truth there. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I followed Hitler, I followed Stalin, I follow. It's like, yeah, if you lived in that time period, you probably would have if you were in
Mm-hmm.
that mentality of statism or that mentality of I need to follow orders and,
Mm-hmm.
the government is justified and I'm born into this system just like we are
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna probably see because, oh, they're speaking some truth. Oh, they're
Mm-hmm.
different. They're here
Mm-hmm.
for the people. They're gonna save me money. It's like, yeah, because there's some truth in what they're saying, it makes everything else that they're saying seem justified, although it may not. So
Yeah.
that is what that's what we're doing here is we're pulling out the good parts of the new age, pulling out the good parts of the constitutional, Second Amendment crowd, and pulling
Right.
out the good parts of the pacifism, pulling out the good, everything,
Right.
because that is what it means to integrate. Going back to your question of what is integration?
Has proven time and time again now is that no matter how much I'm into something, I'm always going to be looking through that own lens of my individuated self first. So I'm not going to like fully jump on some sort of narrative because I've seen too many times how these things can potentially break down. So to have that ability to be in, distill, but never give yourself over to
Right.
something, right? So Cory, before we wrap up, I just want to talk about the your summit that you just recently did. Over 50 guests, End of Slavery Summit. What made you do this? What made you put this together? Just
So over the years, when I was doing my health research, I followed many health summits,
uh-huh.
and I basically structured my summit based on that because
Ah.
I watched so many health summits, and you can look up Fat Summit, you can look up Health and Food and Freedom Summit, I think is another one. Then there's like Gateway to Health Summit.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of different summits, and there's always more health summits occurring. And I was like, what if I can structure
Yeah.
a summit
Mm-hmm.
based on these ideas and make it entirely free because usually summits you have to pay for like all the talks and then in addition you get
Yeah.
more free gifts and I'm like no.
Yeah.
I figured I'd make it all completely free, but I would
Mm-hmm.
structure it in a way where it still gets the message out there and it's working, like not
Great.
making everything super public at once, is making people repost it on their own channel and clip it and share it more and make it feel more exclusive,
Yeah.
although it's all free. And so it's like,
Yeah.
I'm bringing in the best of both worlds again, sort of
Wonderful.
finding where to integrate and just inventing, bringing those ideas that were already there,
Mm-hmm.
improvising and making it
Mm-hmm.
something new with other ideas. That's
Cory,
integrating.
okay, this is really important. Is
Sure.
you were talking about that when you were young.
Yeah.
I have a similar quality within myself. What is it? It's like I'm always looking at a particular structure or format. And then I'm like, oh, if I apply that to that, that's the same thing. And if I apply that to that, is it the holistic mind? What is that? How could you kind of define that? Is like seeing so much potential in one thing to have that vision to be like, oh, I'm going to apply this to this and this and this and this and this and kind of broadly create something really more interesting by putting these things together. What is that? Is that a
I,
pathology, Cory? Are we doing?
I think you asking what is that is the same question I would probably ask you because I don't know. but I
Mm,
can't help but be creative. And I
mhm,
don't know why, but
mhm,
it's just who I am. And, I don't, my parents didn't like get me into creative stuff. I just started writing, I started drawing, I started thinking, I asked a lot of questions, and I
mm,
was just very observatory. I would sit back in nature, I do a lot of reflection. So I think it just goes back to all the other ideas we talked about. And so
mhm,
it's sort of naturally from that comes creativity because you
mhm,
see it's like there's a world full of creations and you're like, wow, so much could be done, and you see the potential because you're so open-minded that you almost have to create because you
mm.
see it's like there's so much room to for improvement, or you see there's currently these structures and nobody sees there's this other structure, so it's like you almost feel like you're obligated to share that structure or put it together and show how it actually works.
Yeah.
So I think that's the mentality. I can't put a name on it. I can't say it's like this or that. Maybe
Mhm,
there is. There
mhm,
probably would be,
mhm,
but I haven't figured out exactly what it is
mhm.
yet.
It's interesting because I've talked to you just several times, and I feel there's a resonance. I mean, this is my perception, right? I feel there's a resonance in our energy that like speaks for itself. And it's so interesting because there's so much I don't know about you, but there's this when I get in your presence, it's like my soul or my spirit's like, yay, I know this person. Like there's this joy. And I just want people to know, and and if you've experienced this, but like when there's that light kind of within you and that drive and that motivation to do the right thing, and you connect with someone else, it's just like in this endless creative, almost like soulful joy. And I greatly appreciate these moments with you and with the other people in my life that I have this with. But I have to tell you, I've had to reconstruct my life a lot because a lot of the relationships I've had in my life haven't felt this way. And I've had to be willing to let go of friendships that were more complicated or really not healthy. Even though they
Yeah.
were my friend for 20 years, they might not have been healthy. And I had to at some point say, you know what? We don't have to do this anymore just because we've been friends so long. And it's just so awesome for me to meet new friends and people and to just have that immediate energetic bond where I feel like it's beyond even words, that we're both working towards the same thing and we're in it. And it's just such a joy. So thank you so much.
Thank you too. I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't talk much about myself as I told you.
Mhm.
But I don't know how to start on that. That was always my biggest issue is where do I start with it? Because I don't know.
Another
I think
book, maybe.
everybody's right. Yeah, I mean, it's like everybody's experiences are unique, but
Yeah.
I guess I'm also unique in the sense it's like I never really had friends in school. I never really I was very shy. I didn't talk at all. And now
Mm,
here I am super talkative and sharing a bunch and I can easily make friends. So it's interesting to go from one end to another. And I was also pretty obese as a child. I was
mm,
pretty like heavy, and I had to lose weight over time. And that with that came so many different mental changes, which
yeah.
possibly contributed to my evolution. But it's not over, so I can't really. That's another thing. But I do think, yeah, it's like there's always going to be struggles. There's always going to be things, and I'm definitely glad to meet you guys because I don't know. I never would have expected to meet you guys, but just
Mhm.
using the tools at my fingertips. I mean, that's that's what I did
Yeah.
with anything inventing. So
Cory, it's interesting. I'd be curious to know a little more about a lot of people in this kind of truth and freedom movement. And I'm wondering if we all have some sort of intrinsic similarities that we don't realize. Like I actually was the same way. I didn't have many friends growing up. I was shy to speak. I was very much of a creative soul. I was a dancer, and I just felt misunderstood, and I just felt like people didn't really understand me. And but once I started doing my work and once I started purifying my mind and trying to figure things out, when that meaning hit, my mouth opened. My mouth was like, I was like, okay, I'm comfortable speaking now because I have something that's meaningful for me, and so many people can do this. And I think that I see that there's been a time where there's been a lot of people who've had the stage and who've been speaking a lot. And now it feels that like this excitement within me that the people who've been behind the scenes a little bit, doing a lot of the work and figuring themselves out to a deeper degree, are may now be taking over that position from where the people who were just kind of babbling on stage. It's kind of like the right, this is what I want to say. It feels like the right people are coming to office. The right people are going to become the leaders. The right people are going to be doing the things. And I don't know how that looks or when that's going to be, but it feels like an exciting possibility for sure.
Yeah. Yes, I think it will happen on its own, which is why it's hard for me to describe things that concern nature and myself. In relation to the world, it's like again, I'm claiming I don't know everything. So it's like, and I'm also using the quote from Socrates that states, "To know that you know nothing is wisdom." So
Yeah,
it's
right.
like, oh, okay. So knowledge is the only good, he says, but then he also says knowledge, he doesn't really know anything. So it's like,
Right.
um,
Paradoxical a bit.
yes, and that's
Hmm.
his own writings. And then what's his method? Just asking questions, the Socratic method. And it's like, okay, sounds pretty similar to what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
But I just care so much about this current generation, and it
Mm.
troubles me so much just to see this generation. And it's not like it's sort of like the boomer coming out of me, like, oh, here's a bunch of kids on their smartphones and all this stuff, but not really that, because I see their problems too. I see the
Right.
people in the older generations and their
Right.
ignorance, like you said, it could be
Yeah.
even worse, way worse.
Yeah.
But it's like I just see so much potential in the younger generations, where it's like you see they have a closer connection to nature. You see they want to learn in different regards. It's like you want to tap into that. It's like
Yeah.
so it drives me insane. That's what drives me the most insane, because it's like to some extent I can relate to them, and it's like I'm becoming more to where I can't relate to them the more I delve
Mm.
into a lot of these
Mm.
truth concepts. So
Mm.
it's like you also want to be careful there, right? It's like you don't
Hmm.
want to outcast yourself more than you already have. You still want to
Hmm.
relate to the average person, but help
Yeah.
them reach different, world views to expand their mind. So
Yeah.
that's the matter of coming back to where things are currently.
Yeah. I love that you said that. Like, this is what frustrates me the most, right? Is this being out of touch in your generation. Um, I totally understand what you just said and not being too distanced from it, realizing that this frustration is cultivating me to be further away from the ability to hold space for them. And this is exactly what I've faced. I would say the thing that frustrates me the most is that we don't offer patients an option for potential and natural ways of healing, right? Like that, to me,
Yeah.
that makes me the most crazy because that's been my experience. But again, if I focus too hard on that, in a way, I see that the patients who are blindly led down that path and haven't maybe woken up to different potentials yet, I start to almost feel frustrated towards them. Like, why aren't they looking into this? Why aren't they? And
Yes.
it pulls me away from the actual work. It helps to refine me to stay in compassion, I guess I should say, and to keep that door open. But it's challenging at the same time. So I feel that which you just said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Cory, thank you so much. I'm going to leave all your information below, and hopefully we can have a chat again. But thank you so much. This was so
Thank you.
enlightening, and you're a super awesome person. And I just hope you continue because I can't wait to see what else you do.
Thank you. Yeah, you come off as a very like nice, supportive, feminine figure. I told you before, and
Thanks.
I just want to say thank you for that as well. I appreciate it. And people
It's
can
my
learn from
pleasure.
everybody, and
That's right. That's right. We can all learn from everybody. Thanks again, Cory.
thank you.